We talk about systemic inequity a lot, and it can feel like this massive, unstoppable force, almost like the weather. But what if that's not the right way to think about it? What if inequity isn't an accident, but a product of design, an architecture that was carefully, deliberately built? And if it was built, well, that means it can be rebuilt. That's what we're going to dig into today. This quote right here from designer Caroline Hill is really our jumping off point. It's such a powerful idea because it completely reframes the problem. It suggests that racism and inequity aren't just some tragic flaw in history that we're stuck with. No, they're the result of intentional choices, a blueprint. And if that's true, it means we have a choice too. We can be the architects of a redesign. Okay, so what does a blueprint for inequity even look like? It's a big question. But to figure out how we can build a more equitable future, we first have to get real about the past. We need to roll up our sleeves and deconstruct an actual historical example, a system that was designed for the exact opposite of equity. We have to see the architecture of control before we can build an architecture of freedom. And for that, we're going to turn to the work of the incredible W.E.B. Du Bois. He gives us this unbelievably detailed analysis of the antebellum South, focusing on a tiny group of people who engineered an entire society just to keep themselves in power. I'm talking about the planter class. 7%. Just let that number sink in for a second. In 1860, this tiny, tiny fraction of the South's population, the planter class, held almost all the power. And with that power, they owned nearly 3 million of the 4 million enslaved people in the entire region. Look at this breakdown. That sliver, that little 7%, they didn't just control the enslaved black population, they also controlled the other 93% of the South. That's 5 million other white folks who were basically kept poor and powerless. The system wasn't just about getting rich, it was about a total, absolute concentration of power, all designed to benefit a select few at the expense of literally everyone else. So the big question is, how did they pull it off? How did such a small group keep such a tight grip on millions of people? Well, it definitely wasn't by accident. They built this incredibly sophisticated, multi-layered system, a complete architecture of control that touched every single part of life in the South. So let's break down their toolbox, right? Politically, they leveraged things like the Three-Fifths Compromise to get way more power in Congress than they should have had. Economically, it was a total monopoly. They owned the land, the money, the labor. Socially, they kept poor whites from getting an education or voting. And the glue that held it all together, a powerful, carefully crafted ideology, a story they told themselves and everyone else to justify the whole rotten system. And if you think there was any subtlety to this, think again. This quote from the Confederate Vice President Alexander H. Stephens just lays it all out there. There's no ambiguity. This wasn't some unfortunate side effect. In their eyes, this was a moral truth, a scientific fact. Their entire world was designed around this belief, and that design was chillingly intentional. Okay, so that was the 19th century blueprint. Brutal. And it can feel like ancient history. But here's the question that really matters. How do the principles of that design still echo today? How does a past that's not even past continue to live in our present? When you put them side by side, the parallels are, well, they're pretty hard to ignore. The strategy to consolidate political power back then draws a pretty clear line to modern-day voter disenfranchisement. Restricting access to education then finds its echo in the educational disparities we still fight today. And those fabricated narratives of inferiority, they're still with us, living on as persistent, harmful stereotypes. The design, you see, has echoes. And this is what brings us all the way back to that opening idea. It's the whole point, really. If we can see the blueprint, if we can deconstruct how an inequitable system was put together, piece by piece, then we can also create a new blueprint. If a system was designed for inequity, it can be redesigned for equity. If it was built, it can be rebuilt. So, how do we actually do that? How do we rebuild? Well, this is where we can go back to the work of Caroline Hill and the Equity X Design framework. Think of it as a modern toolkit for dismantling that old architecture of exclusion and building a brand new one that's centered on healing. The core principle is something called radical inclusion, and it's really the total opposite of the planner's design. If their system was all about intentional exclusion, the redesign has to be about intentional inclusion. It's about actively interrupting the ways we are kept separate and instead recognizing that there are many different stories, many different truths, and we need to listen to the people who own them. And this isn't just some abstract theory. There's a real process here. It starts with us, with the individual. We have to look inward and question our own beliefs. Then it moves to ceding power. And that's a hard one. It's about actively giving up control to make those hidden power dynamics visible. And finally, it requires healing in public, openly acknowledging the harm that was done by the old design, and then practicing how to be in new, inclusive relationships, together. And that really gets to the heart of it all. This isn't just about creating a system that's more fair on paper. Redesigning for equity is about healing the real harm that was done to people, to communities, to our whole public body. It's about repairing what was broken and restoring a sense of wholeness for every single one of us. So we want to leave you with this question. The planters saw themselves as designers, and they built a world that served them. The powerful thing is realizing that we are all designers too. We can design systems that serve everyone. So take a look around at your school, your job, your community. In your world, what is just waiting to be redesigned?